Warning, stamina levels low. Please consume Monster Energy. Warning, stamina levels low. Please consume Monster Energy. Warning, stamina levels low. Please consume Monster Energy. So Radiohead is my favorite band of all time. The way they meld sublime, ethereal soundscapes with poignant melody and dark lyricism strikes me like no other band really can. Their music isn't perfect, even though I do think The King of Limbs is actually pretty phenomenal, but even their greatest songs are hard to unpack and describe to other people. If I had to label their music with 3 tags, I'd start with weird, then experimental, which is really just the first word again, and then finally alt-rock, which essentially is meaningless. Despite their fame and success, many people have never listened to them, and many people who do might leave indifferent or worse, repulsed. My old roommate once described their music to me as an acquired taste, and that's the best way to put it. It's something I love to my core, but I can't readily recommend because of everything that makes it so unique. To me, Hideo Kojima has always been the video game equivalent of Radiohead. He's been in the business for a long time. Everything he creates carries the same DNA while also striving for new and unique things from what came before. He's massively popular and successful, but also his work is so strange and experimental that he's really difficult to recommend.
Do you have a specific philosophy these days about how to approach getting your music to your fans?
I think it's very easy. It's very, very simple. The art always comes first, the commerce follows, and as long as you fill in the checkbook stubs, the commerce follows, but the art has to come first. It has to, and that's the thing, that's where people trip themselves up on in this business, is as they get more successful, they look more towards the commerce. You're dead if you do that.
What I find really weird about people get successful to a point, and then they want to compete with other successful people.
Yeah, and it becomes.
It's like this eating away. It's like, oh no, I won't be that big. Oh no, I won't be that big. What the fuck, man?
Yeah.
If you've been following my channel for a while, you'll know Metal Gear Solid is my all-time favorite series, with 2 and 4 being my favorite. Anyway, Death Stranding is Kojima's first big game since its high-profile breakup with Konami.
Mr. Kojima had every intention of being with us tonight, but unfortunately he was informed by a lawyer representing Konami just recently that he would not be allowed to travel to tonight's awards ceremony to accept any awards.
And while many people, myself included, really adore it, reception's been pretty mixed overall, for all the same reasons I just mentioned. It's weird. It's a game that demands you play it differently from anything that's come before. It's got the DNA of Metal Gear, but a soul that can really only be understood when you strip away all the intricately woven layers that compose it. Before we get into the analysis though, I want to talk about the negative stuff. There is a lot to dislike with Death Stranding, as there is with any game. With games I dislike, I tend to shove all the stuff I like into a small section at the end. Since this is the game I like, I wanted to shove all the dislikes into a small section at the beginning. Always end on a positive note, fellas. Firstly, and this is a big one for a lot of people, the product placement. It's pretty egregious in this game. You've got Monster Energy, you've got AMC's Ride with Norman Reedus, you even get an AMC's Ride with Norman Reedus bike later in the game.
We should be on an episode about margaritas. Fuck yeah.
It breaks immersion quite a bit, and I wish Kojima wouldn't do this, but honestly, it's not such a huge deal to me that I couldn't tune it out. Maybe I'm just desensitized to it. We've seen stuff like this in many other games, but also many other Metal Gear games. In Metal Gear Solid 4, you had the Apple iPod, Regain energy drink, and Playboy magazine, among other things. Metal Gear Solid 5, Ground Zeroes, and Peace Walker all had the Sony Walkman. In Death Stranding, the least egregious of these is the Luden's Nendoroid figure. It's got significance in the story, and while it really makes me want a Nendoroid, it feels less like an ad and more like an object which exists in the game's universe. While Death Stranding is a game about how art, particularly video games, film, and music, can transcend human history and keep us all connected, the product placement is less about the power of art and more about trying to get me to part with my money. Good thing these things don't work on me, am I right? As you progress through Death Stranding, you unlock beer, which exists solely within the Death Stranding universe, and aside from some different animations, it has the same exact effect that drinking Monster Energy does. I also suspect that originally, like in the original draft of the game, the energy drink was just supposed to be water. There's even a bit of text somewhere that wasn't cleared that says water instead of anything else. And your canteen increases when you're in water, so I'm pretty sure they were just supposed to do that and change it to something else at the last second. Another thing is child characters. Thankfully, there's only one in the game, that being 10-year-old Sam, and he doesn't show up much. But he suffers from the same David Cage problem of his personality just being reducible to sad kid. This is weird to me because Kojima and his team have written some pretty compelling child characters in the past. Chico from Peace Walker is pretty good. Paz, who I know isn't really a child but is a spy pretending to be one, is also pretty good. One of my favorite characters and the secret hero of Metal Gear Solid 4, don't let anyone tell you differently, is Sonny Gurlukovich, who, despite being a sad and sheltered kid, really flourishes and, dare I say, shines when her personality is contrasted against the personalities of Otacon and Old Snake.
I'm gonna be spewing out poison soon enough anyway. What's one more smoke gonna hurt?
This is a no smoking flight.
Her presence on its own gives a lot of life to the grim, steely, cold shell that is her immediate world, this plane called the Nomad.
This is my sunny side up fortune telling. When it turns out good, it means something good is gonna happen.
Oh. So that's why you don't cook them over easy.
I don't want to go home. I don't want to go home.
I wish we got more of that sense with Kid Sam and Amelie. Their scenes together are fairly brief, and this is for important narrative reasons. But even older Sam himself is a quiet, understated person who has difficulty forming relationships. But the overall experience would have been much more compelling if I felt more character from Kid Sam.
You can also use it to count stuff. I add a knot when I make a friend.
Okay. Then how about I add another knot every time I see you?
Physics can be a bit annoying. This isn't really a physics-based game like, say, Breath of the Wild is. Like, a lot of it is animation based, and a lot of the physics are really exaggerated, clearly, but you can still get into some wonky situations where you're falling over or tripping randomly and you're just like, what the fuck? In a game like this, where terrain is such a big deal, it's super annoying when you try to play it safe and still fuck up. Though I can imagine the way this game was developed, it's just not fully possible to have it be 100% foolproof. It's still hella more reliable than fucking Fallout 4, for instance.
And this is the best one. So I didn't see this one drop, but the crate is stuck in the floor. And then it
Enemy AI can be a bit wonky. Enemies will sometimes get caught in AI loops, such as here, when this truck keeps backing in and out because mules try to stay out of timefall, and I guess the driver didn't get the memo. During my PS4 playthrough, one mule just stopped working. He wouldn't respond to anything, and it was as if he was already unconscious, but still standing upright. And here, Higgs glitched out during his final fight. He kept trying to throw a grenade, but the object didn't spawn, so I guess he kept trying to do it over and over. This fixed itself when I ran up close to him. The game doesn't do a very good job of explaining one thing in particular, that cargo damage and container damage are two separate things. Now, the director's cut does a better job of explaining this very early on.
Looks like one of your containers has been compromised. No need to panic. So long as you don't drop it, the content shouldn't sustain any damage. And if the cargo itself is okay, your eval won't be affected. Just take a little extra care from here on out. Fine. Good luck.
Let's say I'm carrying a package with a pizza inside, which, yes, is a real mission you can take in the game. Cargo damage represents how much damage the actual pizza itself has sustained, while container damage represents how much damage the pizza box has sustained.
Make sure you carry pizzas properly at all times. If you do something stupid like turn it on its side, you'll ruin it.
The cargo itself will only get damaged if the cargo is struck or falls over. So say if you're getting shot at or you slam into a rock. But the container sustains damage due to timefall, and the less health the container has, the more damage the cargo inside will take. You'll get many messages while traveling that say cargo container is ruined, but you can still deliver that package and get full marks for it if the cargo inside has not fallen over or been smashed. Conversely, if the cargo inside is damaged, it can't be repaired. Container repair sprays only restore the health of the box, not whatever's inside it. It took me quite a while, I'm saying a couple of hours, to get this during my first playthrough. I really like this mechanic, and I love how punishing timefall can be to reckless playstyles, but I wish it were taught better through gameplay. Weirdly, you can customize the color of Sam's outfit, but only after you've beaten the main storyline. I'm not entirely sure why this particular unlock works the way it does, especially since there are plenty of other customizable items you get throughout the game, especially in the director's cut. I remember this being a big issue for some people. You can't listen to music as you travel, even after you've beaten the game. This comes down to an artistic choice. There's something to be said about having music only play in the open world at specific points in the world or in the story. Music in this game is fine-tuned to work in a very specific way, but it is odd that after beating the game, you don't unlock an MP3 player or something. I think the main reason for this isn't even because of the music that plays during certain drops. I think the real reason you can't listen to music in the open world is because players can assign music to the structures they build. The music that emanates from the distance and can lure lost players closer to a structure they might not have known was there, it's supposed to add to that sense of communion one feels with the world and the others as they play. Whenever the open world music begins playing on its own, it's often in contrast to the communion one feels when hearing music from a structure. The open world music signifies instead the intense isolation bearing upon Sam as he trudges into increasingly hostile territory. That said, while in some respects I understand and agree with the artistic choice to utilize music in those ways, I also understand and agree with those who would prefer to choose what they listen to and when. It's made doubly odd when you consider that you could listen to music while sneaking in Metal Gear Solid 4 and 5, games which require much more for you to listen to environmental cues. This was even a pretty important mechanic in Ground Zeroes, where you had to use an audio recording to figure out where pause was being held.
Bus!
On your feet.
Okay.
Chico was taken out of his cage. Did he leave the tape recording while he was being moved?
I wonder if this was considered during development and scrapped for any particular reason, but it's still not even in the director's cut, so I'm pretty sure it was just a choice that Kojima made specifically for the artistic feel of his game. And the cool thing about art is that you can disagree with it. Also, difficulty. I'm going to have a whole separate section on difficulty. No, I'm not. That's not true. I didn't write a section for difficulty. I wrote this before I wrote anything else. So I had no idea what the fuck I was going to write, actually. I just lied to my own self. Suffice it to say, this game is usually a little too easy, and that lack of difficulty may make the loop less than compelling for some. I played it through on hard mode on the PS4 and very hard mode when it came out for the PC release. On very hard mode, the game is a lot more challenging. Stamina runs through quicker and BT spawn in greater concentration, making it damn near impossible to just drive past them like I used to be able to. Also, the fucking boss fights, dude, especially if you just try to speed through them, they are fucking intense. Cliff does not fuck around, and some of those BT bosses are just impossible. Thankfully, Sam is immortal, so it all checks out. Mwah. Perfect. Again, I'll talk more about difficulty later, which isn't true because I wrote this before I wrote anything else, and I never actually wrote a section on difficulty. But despite the novelty and the uniqueness of this gameplay loop, many players might lose interest if they don't feel the loop at first is very challenging. Lastly, this game's got a ton of technical issues on PCs. I wrote this specific part back when it first came out for PC, maybe about a month afterward or so. So the experience has definitely changed. There have been a ton more updates, and I got a new fucking AMD Ryzen 5600X. So yeah, a lot of my specific issues have been resolved. But I'm still gonna read this paragraph out because in case anyone else is still having issues, you just know it's not just you. I don't think the game was perfectly technically tested for PC, but anyway. Experience may vary, but I experienced quite a few crashes. There was this one weird soft lock after chapter 13 that I thought meant I wouldn't be able to finish the game. Thankfully, turning my memory streaming to default fixed this for some weird reason. The skyboxes looked really weird on PC, and you're gonna see that in a lot of my footage. I'm pretty sure the specific reason for that was DLSS, because when I turned off DLSS and just had anti-aliasing on a specific setting, it looked a shit ton better, and I didn't notice any particular performance differences. Anyway, in most of the footage you're seeing in the video, it's from my PC playthrough, not the PS5 or my PS4 playthrough. I was running everything on max settings on a 2080 Ti. I didn't have the AMD Ryzen CPU at this time. During this time, I had an Intel CPU, I believe, but I believe I had 32 gigabytes of RAM at the time, Intel CPU, can't remember exactly which one, and 2080 Ti. Pretty decent specs. Everything else looked gorgeous except for the skyboxes, which again, I'm pretty sure was the fault of DLSS. It made this weird after image effect whenever an object was floating into the sky, which is like everything in this game, so what the fuck. Turning it off got rid of that after image effect and just made everything look a lot crisper and more sharp and pretty. So the main thing that almost completely prevented my second playthrough and therefore this video was this now loading glitch I kept getting while traveling at high speeds in the open world. It made the entire game completely unplayable until I changed my frame rate to 60 FPS. Then it was tolerable, but it definitely wasn't fixed by any measure. Upgrading my CPU to an AMD Ryzen 5600X completely fixed the problem for me. I literally don't experience it anymore. So it was probably just that my CPU couldn't keep up with the loading of assets and stuff like that within the game. Although, again, changing my FPS to 60 from the original 120 or 144 that I had it on made the problem more tolerable, made it so that I could actually finish the game. But that's all the bad that I wrote down and that I can think of off the top of my head. I am ready to move on and talk about, you know, why I really like and appreciate this game, and I can't wait to see more of what Kojima has to offer. So without further ado, here is the Death Stranding video essay. Didn't I already say that exactly? Damn, I suck at this. I fucking suck. It's the Monster Energy. It's just not doing it for me. It's also 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm sure my neighbors hate me. All right, cool. Death Stranding takes place in a world racked by the titular event. Dead people, dead animals, and literal armies of the dead flow helplessly into the living world through beaches, which are surreal, timeless, purgatorial planes which each living individual possesses. The dead who are now stuck in the living world are known as BTs, or beached things. With the appearance of BTs comes timefall, which rapidly accelerates time and decay for almost anything it touches. And also with BTs comes void outs. Now, I misunderstood void outs when I first began playing. Killing a person on its own does not trigger a void out. The game can be quite confusing about this. When a person is killed in this post-Death Stranding world, they undergo necrosis, which means they begin the process of turning into a BT. To avoid this, dead bodies are burned in incinerators far removed from cities and other inhabited places. You see their large towers rising into the sky so they can shoot chiralium, the byproduct of these dead now appearing in the world of the living, away from civilization.
Where are you taking them?
Closest incinerators to the north.
This route's crawling with BTs. Sure you can't use another?
I wish I could, but there's no time.
Then just burn the poor bastard right here.
You put all that chiralium in the air so close to town? Can't do it.
Void outs occur when the antimatter of a BT comes into contact with the living matter of a living person. BTs carry this antimatter over from the beach via their umbilical cords. And when a BT eats a living person, this triggers a void out.
BTs are connected to the other side via umbilical cords, right? When those cords bring the matter of our world into contact with the antimatter of theirs, boom, void out.
You can actually see gameplay examples of this. During boss fights, the boss BTs will use certain moves that heavily stagger Sam. They then follow up by trying to eat him. At that point, when they're ingesting Sam, they're not just killing him, but also triggering a void out. Even if an NPC is attacked by a BT, which, yes, can happen and is entirely unscripted in the game, and a void out occurs as a result of that, Sam can repatriate, but the game will force you to revisit an old save. Within the game universe, that area is now a giant crater, which makes it impossible to continue forward. You can even trigger void outs in areas on the map that stay forever throughout your entire game world's existence. And it's so hella fucking cool. If you get eaten by a BT in an area which isn't considered a significant area, like where people live or where something has to happen or during a specific mission, it will just leave a giant crater there, and then it's so interesting. Strand, in the context of this game, takes on several meanings as explained by Amelie here.
It's a funny word, strand. A strand is part of rope or bond, while stranding means being washed up on the shore. And being stranded is when you can't go home.
A strand is a single line of something, like string or hair that can be tied into a knot. To be stranded means to be lost and away from home or communication with the outside world, and stranding refers to beached whales, a phenomenon where living whales wash up onto a beach where obviously they can't swim back to the water, so they end up drying up and ultimately die on the beach.
I'm stranded now, Sam, here on the shore of the Pacific. thousands of miles away. But our bond still holds. You're free, but we're still connected. Don't tell me we're not.
The game, very unsubtly, is about being connected to other people and rebuilding that connection when it is severed. Strands symbolize the individual lines of filament, like strings of a spider web, which form knots, symbols of connection and strength. Through to its very core, gameplay, story, characters, aesthetic, Death Stranding hammers home those themes of connection. I'll talk more about the gameplay implications of this theme later, but there is very little in this game that doesn't, in some way or another, emphasize either union or loneliness in a meaningful way. And more eerily, the game emphasizes that even when we are connected, we're still isolated in this post-Stranding world. Several people drew comparisons between Death Stranding and our current global situation, which Kojima, in his typical omniscient fashion, seems to have foreseen. This game came out in 2019, just before the pandemic really hit in the United States and a lot of places around the world. And so yeah, Kojima's done it again. Anyway, at the height of 2020's complications, many of us were holed up at home and scared of what lied outside. The postal worker and the hospital nurse became our society's frontliners as we struggled to make sense of what was going on around us. And despite our isolation, we remained connected to each other through art, through the internet, through social media, as our government scrambled, often doing more harm than good, to wave the problem away and pretend like it was helping. Oh, wait, that last part isn't really relevant. Now, I don't want to make light of this situation by comparing it to a game I really like, but art often is reflective and predictive of current events. One major contrast to our situation and the game, though, is what death means. Throughout the game, human beings are connected through death. After all, it's one of the main things that everyone shares. Across all civilization, culture, species, forms of living matter, death is a connecting force that brings living things into communion with each other. And that communion compels living things to grow stronger and stronger. And that's why I go out of my way to kill every fucking roach I see in my goddamn apartment. I'm going to war, bitch. So anyway, death connects all living creatures. Another byproduct of the titular Death Stranding is the abundance of chiralium, a substance which I will lovingly refer to occasionally as death juice. This substance is the reason you see things floating around the world. Death juice comes from the beach and is also pumped into the world like carbon dioxide when a dead body is burned. It's the substance which powers the future technology that we see in Death Stranding, namely the chiral network. The chiral network operates like the internet, but without the constraints of time.
Once you connect it to the terminal, you'll be able to initiate zero-time massive data transmission with the UCA network. And just like that, you'll reconnect us not only to each other, but to our past.
By sending data through the beach and back into the world of the living, massive amounts of information can be sent instantaneously and across almost any distance.
I understand you now have access to a chiral printer, an extraordinarily useful device that can only function because of the manner in which our network utilizes the beach, enabling us to transfer massive volumes of data instantaneously. Since under normal circumstances, such transfers will take hours, if not days, some have speculated that the chiral network might, in essence, be a time machine. That it is transmitting data into the past. Suffice it to say, we have yet to fully grasp the fundamental nature of the network and the beach which we have come to rely upon. One might liken our relationship with it to that of primitive man's with fire. Is it useful? Quite. Is it dangerous? Undeniably so.
These particles are distinctly not timeless. They evolve. Take the electron. It has this type of intrinsic quantum spin that we call chirality. And this can either be clockwise or counterclockwise relative to the direction of motion. We call this left-handedness or right-handedness.
Chirality itself is a bit difficult to conceptualize. How I understand it is when two objects are effectively the same, but are incapable of overlapping.
The most practical way to see chirality in action is to put your hands out and try to layer one on top of the other. In doing so, you can see that because your hands are mirror images of each other, they are asymmetric and don't really line up. Parallel but opposites. Kojima Productions continued. For example, in Buddhism, putting hands together to pray has a symbolism, the right hand being that of Buddha and the left hand being that of the person. Putting together the hands to pray symbolizes becoming one with Buddha. Now, this particular tweet highlights something really interesting. The only way for chiral hands to align with each other is for them to be facing in opposite directions. So if you bring your hands together like you're gonna pray, the two hands actually superimpose. But in doing so, the left hand is facing right and the right hand is facing left.
You can also get a sense for the idea here in this scene when Sam and Amelie's hands are in similar positions, but the two cannot overlap because they're facing each other. As I understand it, chiralium death juice comes from that conflict. Sam uses a Cupid, which is a device made from chiralium in order to connect different knots and prepper shelters into the overall chiral network. This brings the world together through technology while also strengthening the chiral levels where the knots are connected.
When a region is integrated into the chiral network, it's also brought closer to the beach, in a manner of speaking.
Death and union are inseparable forces in that way. Death Stranding is also awash in theories of quantum mechanics and space-time, all as it relates to death. Higgs, one of the primary antagonists of the game, is named after the Higgs field, and his alias, Peter Englert, is an amalgam of Peter Higgs and Francois Englert, who formed important theories related to the Higgs field. The Higgs field equation is one of 6 equations that activates on Sam's Cupid when he connects a region to the chiral network. Here are the others according to the Death Stranding wiki.
We conclude that QFT is essentially correct, but it's an incomplete theory without a mass-giving field. The Higgs field is the best, least silly option to do this. But how do we prove it? Enter the Higgs boson. Just like the other fields, the Higgs field can vibrate around its baseline value, which gives us the boson. This particle actually has nothing to do with giving anything mass. However, if we observe the particle, then it means that the field also exists.
Now, I'm no scientist.
I'm not a scientist, I don't claim to be a scientist, I'm just an average dude.
And I'm definitely no quantum physicist. I'm not gonna pretend to understand what half of this stuff means or the implications of that, but what I do understand is that the game is painting an inextricable link between death and space-time. Death isn't just something that happens to living organisms. Death is a state of transformation or transferal during which a being and all the information which comprises that being is transported from the world of the living through the beach and into the afterlife. Through the use of quantum mechanics, that afterlife could theoretically be studied and have its energy harnessed for use in the world of the living. That doesn't end up happening. Instead, human beings learn to harness the power of the beach, which inevitably leads the dead to battle back.
Why do World War era soldiers wander the beach a century after they fell? Normally the souls of the dead move on. The beach is just a corridor, a place through which they pass on the way to the other side. But if regret, resentment, a fervent desire to remain, if these feelings are powerful enough, they may give rise to an altogether different beach, a collective purgatory for an army of the damned.
And, as we'll find out later, it's only because of individuals with unique ties to the beach, namely Amelie and Mama, that human beings are capable of developing the technology to harness this power at all. So those are the basics, and there's a decent amount of stuff I haven't even touched upon, like the cufflinks or the tar. The world of Death Stranding is expansive and is thoroughly explored in gameplay, in cinematography, and in the story. Even at a glance, something anyone can appreciate about this world building is the sheer beauty of the game. Almost anything you see and hear has a function or a purpose. When I examine the character relationships and the socio-political mechanics of Death Stranding's world, I'm reminded of the universe established in the novel Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley is a dystopian novel where human existence is controlled on a genetic, societal, and personal level to ensure mechanical, almost robotic stability and efficiency to effectively make civilization immortal. Through the use of drugs, eugenics, and social conditioning, humans are taught to pursue and satisfy sexual and other physical desires quickly to unconditionally accept the social order and their respective roles in larger society. No human is valuable on their own. Rather, a person is only valuable in terms of what they can contribute to the mechanics of society itself. The social order is solidly hierarchical and is given almost religious significance within society. The biggest threat to the social order is suffering. Negative emotions and emotional attachments, which place an undue burden on the mechanisms of society, are discouraged by the dissolution of the family unit, genetic and social conditioning, the promotion of drugs and promiscuity, among other things. Brave New World is also firmly about the difficulties of being an outcast. Loneliness is considered antisocial and a danger to society. While it doesn't suggest a full social hive mind akin to 1984, it does suggest a tendency toward efficiency, order, and contribution to the societal machine.
On October 1913, Henry Ford introduced one of history's great inventions, the assembly line. It transformed industry worldwide.
The society venerates Henry Ford, founder of the Ford Motor Company, specifically for his development of the assembly line. From the top down, the society operates as if it's on an assembly line.
The assembly line has always been an impressive mix of man and machine.
Loneliness, or anything that might cause an individual to harbor a strong emotional attachment to any given thing, nostalgia, religion, maternity, monogamy, family, is a threat to the flow of the efficiency of the assembly line. Death Stranding's world follows a similar social order, albeit for vastly different reasons. People are wed to their role, so much so that most of the named characters' last names are literally just extensions of their position within the societal structure.
Sam Porter Bridges. The man who delivers.
George Baton of the Way Station, the Connecting Point, William Lake of Lake Knot City, the engineer, the craftsman, the photographer, the novelist. Sam never asked their names or how their roles came to be. He just accepts that they are. Even for the named characters, their names are extensions of their positions or placements within the society. George Baton, William Lake, Aaron Hill. Even those like Mama, Hartman, and Deadman are defined by their roles, how society perceives them, not by who they are. Sam tries to buy into this utilitarian view of the world himself, pretending to be called Sam Porter Bridges rather than his adoptive last name Strand.
Listen, you are Sam Strand.
No, I'm not. Not anymore. My name is Sam Porter Bridges.
It's almost as if the name defines who he's supposed to be in life, and he's trying to counteract that.
Sam Porter, I presume?
This strictly pragmatic view of the world is espoused mainly by the UCA under the leadership of Bridget Strand and Di Hardman. It is most specifically highlighted with the relationships of Sam, Deadman, and Lou with the UCA. Lou is not a person, according to the UCA. Lou is not granted personhood. Lou is, for all intents and purposes, a bridge baby, a piece of equipment whose burden to society, needing to be constantly tended to and recharged, so to speak, is outweighed by his function in society. Lou's emotions and needs only matter so far as the deficiency of those needs don't hinder the mission.
Its brain activity is increasing. It's accumulating memories. BB-28 is becoming self-aware, becoming an actual child.
Doesn't sound like a problem to me.
It's hardware, Sam. Manufactured for a purpose.
It's only through Sam's and Deadman's growing attachment with the bridge baby that it is afforded personhood. I think this serves as a meta-commentary on gameplay itself and gives way to two distinct modes of interacting with the game. The first, I'll call it the pro gamer mode, which I personally took part in during my DX playthrough so I could beat it as quickly as possible. It's purely pragmatic. This mindset can be summarized by the question, how do I maximize the thrills in this video game? These players won't waste time tending to BT or their packages or their equipment, and since game overs are rare, these players might likely altogether stop tending to Sam. These characters and devices are a means to an end, that end being to complete the game and or to have fun with it. So the player ends up falling in line with the UCA and the controllers of Brave New World society. Nothing matters except the bottom line. Every auxiliary need should only be tended to if absolutely necessary toward meeting that goal. The game itself, in that vein, is only meaningful for the escapism it can provide. It's soma, a drug to momentarily spur the imagination and take you away from the present. Its characters and systems are lesser parts which serve only to justify the whole. I guess you could say that about how people interact with any game, but I just find the comparison too apt to not bring it up here. The second mode of play, the soy boy mode as I call it, is ostensibly the way Kojima wants you to play the game. You stop and start. You plot your routes. You take time to master the terrain.
We have the capacity to live each day imagining what tomorrow will be like. And our imagination once gave rise to a rich, vibrant culture. But somewhere along the line, we lost sight of tomorrow. We reduced ourselves to animals, focused only on the here and now.
You tend to Lou when she's scared. You recycle old materials and equipment. You donate to out-of-the-way structures and facilities. You deliver lost packages. You take care of Sam, change his boots, take showers, drop a fat deuce. The mentality is defined by a pressing desire to care for Death Stranding's world using Sam as a proxy. With this mindset, the player affords significance to the game's systems and personhood to the likes of Sam, Deadman, BB, and the other characters throughout the game. Dumb soy boy bullshit aside, within the story itself, an individual may achieve personhood, this appreciation beyond just their role, as a function of their relationship to death. Mama expresses as much to Sam after you unlock the cargo bots.
Before the Death Stranding, scientists used to fret over the singularity, the possibility that someone might create an AI smarter than any human. But it never happened. Machines don't cause void outs. They can't die. They don't have beaches. No matter how far they come, machines will never understand death like we do. And because of that, they'll never truly surpass us.
In other words, the ability to die, or specifically to cause void outs, is what grants humans the power that they have. It's what makes human beings special, that we have the unique ability to completely fuck up the entire world around us, even when we die. This proximity to death necessarily gives people a sense of identity. Sam, Lou, Mama, Lochna, Deadman, Cliff, Die Hardman, Hartman, Amelie, Fragile. It's their nearness to death which motivates them and makes them more than a tool in this world. They have a past, a history traceable through death itself. But there's one character who doesn't quite understand that. Higgs. For Higgs, death doesn't bear the same gravity. It's all a game to him, entertainment. How do I maximize the thrills? It reflects the bleak end of Brave New World, where the citizens of this dystopia witness firsthand the death of an innocent woman and cheer it on, asking for more violence. We want the whip. We want... And all of a sudden, they had what they wanted. With a whoop of delighted excitement, the line broke. There was a convergent stampede toward that magnetic center of attraction. Pain was a fascinating horror. Hungrily, they gathered round, pushing and scrambling like swine throughout the trough. Citizens in this brave new world are sheltered, instructed by society to demand what they desire and take it without delay or suffering. To further eliminate emotional distress, the citizens are also conditioned not to appreciate death in the same way we do in our world. Death is not to be feared or celebrated. Every tot spends 2 mornings a week in the hospital for the dying. All the best toys are kept there, and they get chocolate cream on the death days. They learn to take dying as a matter of course. like any other physiological process. Those who die in Brave New World are incinerated, contributing their chemicals, even in death, to that greater machine which is society itself. Death ultimately is no more meaningful than the byproducts it can provide for society. The parallels are obvious. In Death Stranding, when someone dies, their body is also cremated in special incinerators. But the intention is not to harvest the dead for phosphorus or other usable resources. Rather, the purpose is to funnel the chiral matter, the death juice, from the surface and shoot it into the air where it won't affect the people or technology below. In Death Stranding, death is the thing that makes humans special. It's incredibly important for tracing the history of humanity and life in general.
All the lost and fragmented junk data will be compiled and restored, like bringing a dinosaur back to life from a fossil.
And with death comes the beach and BTs. As such, it's treated and handled with an unprecedented degree of significance. Every death is a nuclear bomb just waiting to blow. Death is also the connective tissue bringing humanity together. But Higgs, desensitized to death and opposed to the ideal of reconnecting humanity, uses death to tear civilization apart. He has no real stake in society. It's entertainment to him, a game like the frothing, bloodthirsty mob at the end of Brave New World. Higgs craves the fascinating horror of pain. More so, however, Higgs craves the chaos wrought by death and his own destructive abilities. At any point, he could directly take down Fragile, directly take down Sam, directly do any number of things to wreak havoc, but he doesn't. He always beats around the bush, as if he's trying to exact as much entertainment out of it as he possibly can. He sees himself as Sakher, divine, the particle of God, far apart from and above the mundane systems. Human relationships and motivations beyond the pursuit of death and power are beneath him.
So it was you that dragged him into all this?
I'm asking you to marry me, dummy.
I will. I do. Yes.
In the post-Death Stranding world, individuals aren't really having sex, and it's obvious that interpersonal relationships are a rarity, sort of like my own life. Yep, definitely not lonely over here. As such, people often turn to oxytocin, a chemical the game describes as naturally occurring when a mother holds her child or when a person touches another person. Die Hardman explains in an interview that the human brain would also secrete oxytocin as a result of validation. Before the Stranding, the whole world was connected. There were social networks that people used to communicate all the time. And if you liked something that someone else had uploaded, you let them know by giving them, well, a like. Eventually, someone ran tests on the users of these networks and discovered that receiving a like triggered a rush of oxytocin. The theory was that it stemmed from the sense of being acknowledged. Even though you couldn't see the person you were interacting with, it still felt like they were accepting you, praising you. And who wouldn't like that? In the post-Stranding world, oxytocin is distributed as a drug for people's private consumption. It's a cure for the stifling loneliness and lack of validation that comes of keeping oneself apart from everyone else. I compare this world's dependency on oxytocin to Brave New World's Soma. It's unclear how ingesting or taking oxytocin physiologically affects a person beyond making them happy, but Soma is a hallucinogenic drug described as going on holiday. The character Linda is sedated by Soma to guide her to a quiet death. The experience is described as such. The return to civilization for her was the return to Soma, was the possibility of lying in bed and taking holiday after holiday, without ever having to come back to a headache or a fit of vomiting, as though you'd done something so shamefully antisocial that you could never hold your head up again. Her consciousness as she nears death is further detailed. She saw him, knew him, John, but situated the real face, the real and violent hands in an imaginary world among the inward and private equivalents of Patchouli and the Superwurlitzer, among the transfigured memories and the strangely composed sensations that constituted the universe of her dream. While I don't imagine ingesting oxytocin to be the same degree of mind trip, It is similar in the sense that its purpose is explicitly to combat loneliness and negative thoughts. Without it, and due to a prevalence of dooms throughout the world, more on that later, people are likely to become depressed and even suicidal. In Brave New World, loneliness takes on an almost metaphysical power. It becomes a presence in itself. The character Helmholtz, a professor with the desire to create meaningful art, describes the loneliness in a poem. Yesterday's committee, sticks but a broken drum. Midnight in the city, flutes in a vacuum, shut lips, sleeping faces, every stopped machine, the dumb and littered places where crowds have been. All silences rejoice, weep loudly or low, speak but with the voice of whom I do not know. Absence, say of Susans, absence of Egerias, arms in respective bosoms, lips and posteriors slowly form a presence. Whom? And I ask, of what? So absurd an essence that something which is not, nevertheless should populate empty night more solidly than that with which we copulate. Why should it seem so squalidly? This sense of solitude as a physical presence invokes to me the eerie silences that punctuate the journey in Death Stranding. There's an immense power to the silence and loneliness throughout the game. When you enter a huge city just to find no one there to greet you, when you sit and rest in the grass that looks like no person's ever walked, all silences rejoice. Loneliness is a persistent and unstoppable force in Death Stranding. In the cities, on the road, and in the private rooms, loneliness is always present, but it can be held at bay. Not with the stifling, hypersocial society of Huxley's Brave New World, but rather with the occasional giggle from BB, or the chorus of a hot spring, or the music of a bridge or a postbox, the shape of another porter appearing over the horizon, the rush of oxytocin brought by a like from another traveling soul. Loneliness isn't overcome by the cold, sterile, simulated warmth of a private room or a lab or a radio call. It's overcome by extending oneself to the outside world, prompting potential feedback. It reminds me of the Vsauce isolation video in which he voluntarily undergoes solitary confinement for 72 hours. Devoid of stimulation, he's confused, disoriented, impatient. And upon being released, Vsauce explains his excitement for getting out.
Oh my gosh, it's bright in there.
It's really bright in there. I hadn't really noticed, but now that you mention it.
Congratulations.
Hey, that knock scared me.
Did it startle you?
Yeah. Every little noise has been startling me.
Okay. You seem very with it right now.
It's excited energy by coming out. At first I thought it was that I want to communicate, but actually I need this direction too. Even if it's just nods and stuff, that's so much better.
Vsauce continues in a post-experiment interview.
As I started to anticipate coming out and being able to talk to people and share my experience, I realized how important that was. If you only have your own experiences, you're not fully having them. You have to have someone else to listen to them and react to them, and then you've fully experienced them.
Death Stranding is that constant reaching to share what one has been through with another being. The handprint symbolism solidifies this. And the handprints we see when BTs seek out humans? Why, I'd say that's just evidence of our otherworldly friends yearning to forge a connection. They're reaching out to us, attempting to bridge the gap between the realm of the dead and that of the living. The dead are reaching to stay connected with the living, and the living are reaching to remain connected with each other. They're reaching their hands to pull each other close and share their experiences, art, music, stories. And they can only hope for some response, some feedback, some validation from the other side. You embody this reaching too in your travels. No matter what cool technology you might unlock, at the end of the day, you're making connections by reaching out, picking up packages, and delivering them with your own two hands. And it's why at the close of the game, when the gun and all else fails, you need to physically reach to Amelie to bring her back to the side of humanity. But one of the counters to this reaching, and another major theme throughout the work, is the ease at which one can be fooled by appearances. The mask.
I brought you a metaphor. Take it with you. Tell the lifers with Porter syndrome what happens when you hide behind the mask.
It's why physical touch is so important, because without it, without that reaching, without that knowing, it's impossible to tell if anyone is ever really there.
See? It's like I'm not even here. Same as it ever was.
This occurs with several characters, Deadman most frequently.
Because I'm not really here. Apologies. This is just a chiralgram.
Amelie especially thrives in that Schrodinger space of knowing and not knowing. Every scene where Sam cannot touch her, where he cannot reach her, is another moment where both he and the player are left unaware of where she truly is, and if she really is what she appears to be. These holograms are important to modern human connection, but they also facilitate lies. Only the sense of touch can reveal the lie or the truth for what it is.
Raiden, turn the game console off right now.
I'm ready, Sam Strand. Make your choice.
Wait. I don't know what to do.
Sure you do. After everything, how could you not?
I've spoken about ludonarrative dissonance most recently in my The Last of Us Part 2 video. I won't go into detail about that game here, links on the screen if you want to watch it, but I and others like Nakey Jakey and Steph Sterling found ourselves constantly frustrated by the lack of consistency between what the player was expected to feel during cutscenes and what the player is expected to do or feel during gameplay. On the other hand, I think Kojima is a master of this sort of thing, weaving the player's own expectations and curiosity into the experience of both the story and the gameplay. In Metal Gear Solid 2, for instance, the player delivers and uploads a virus into the Arsenal Gear system, which in turn causes the game to glitch out because the carefully simulated reality surrounding the player character, Raiden, is being erased by the virus that the player uploaded.
I hear it's amazing when the famous purple stuffed worm in Flapjaw space with the tuning fork does a raw blink on Harry Carey rock. I need scissors. 61.
Or in Metal Gear Solid 5, a virus, a real one this time, not a computer virus, begins tearing through the ranks of Diamond Dogs, and you, the player, will continue to lose staff members to illness until you, the player, figure out what's causing the illness and properly quarantine all those suspected of bearing it. Or later, when the sickness returns and you, the player, are forced to go in and systematically kill all of the infected soldiers, some of which you might have even come to recognize.
Boss! Hey! Let's let the boss decide. We live and die by your order, boss. Boss!
Ludo-Narrative Consistency is the seamless interplay between gameplay choices that the player makes and narrative concepts. And to be fair, it's really hard. It requires deep thought about the underlying messages, meanings, and mechanics of the game and world design, and in some cases, it requires some compromises on the linearity of how your game might play out or the black and white morality of the player character. I've recently made a game. Yeah, I know. Autographs later, I promise. It's on Dreams, video in the description or on the screen if you can't play it yourself. While it's far, far from perfect, I had to keep these concepts in mind for the sake of narrative consistency. For example, how do you make a boss fight where the thing trying to kill you is not really your enemy? Somehow you have to help this thing, and not in the lightning returns way where you just kill the fuck out of it to make it good again. No, I needed to design a puzzle around this boss which supported the story but still gave this fight the weight it deserved. Death Stranding does Ludo-Narrative Consistency incredibly well. Damn near everything you see in a cutscene has gameplay implications. The void out leading to entering the seam, this is what happens when Sam actually dies in the game. Void outs in general, they don't normally occur on their own. No, they only occur when a BT attempts to eat a person, just like they explain in the story. If Sam's eaten during a boss fight, it triggers a void out, which leaves a big ass permanent crater in your game's open world. And it's so fucking cool, I cannot get over it. It's even visible on your world map, for fuck's sake. Porters and mules that you see in the open world will flee when it begins to rain. Porters can be attacked and eaten by BTs as well. Dead bodies, even those you kill yourself, can turn into BTs unless you deliver them to an incinerator.
You got a body on your hands. Doesn't matter how it happened, you can't ignore it. And if you're directly responsible, all the more reason to clean it up. Any corpse left alone will eventually go necro and pop a BT. You've got to dispose of it before that happens.
While the potential game overs are a bit lackluster, usually just going to a screen that says you failed, dumbass, I'm far more blown away that craters actually exist in the game. I remember hearing about that before the game came out, and I was like, there's no way. And I played through the whole game, and I was like, oh, I guess it's just a story thing. But no, you can actually have craters in your game world that actually block your traversal. There is a clear consistency between how the game tells you the world works and how the game actually plays. More so, there are hidden story elements that actually play a role in the game itself, such as during the Sahelanthropus fight that I like to call it, even though Sahelanthropus was the Metal Gear Solid 5 thing, whatever, it's just a stupid joke, whatever. That Amelie you see there on its chest is not real. It's a fake Amelie, and if you shoot it, you actually get some dialogue that shows that it's not real. I'll talk about that more later. And yes, that is a phrase you will be hearing a lot of times because I made the script over a year and it's like 100 pages long and it's a lot, okay? You know, fun fact, I went outside for the sole purpose of getting snow all over me, just so I could film this one part. And it's not even snowing, it's like sleet. Or actually, it's basically just raining at this point. I'm a little wet, though. Yeah, I guess that counts for something. I don't know what the point of this whole thing was. Nothing helps me warm up more than a good old 100 Piper's blended Scotch whiskey, which, fun fact, tastes worse the more you drink it. Who wants to see disgust captured in 4K? Let's see how it is. It's actually not that bad. I'm just bad at taking shots. 3, 2, 1. I need to wash this shot glass. 3, 2, 1. See, what I do is I throw it back, but then for some reason I don't swallow right away. I'm good at throwing it back, but I'm not so good at swallowing, you know? You know what I mean? Ever have that problem? Anyway, by far the greatest area where this title shines is in its aesthetic. Almost every single design choice in this game feels purposeful and handcrafted to support the stunningly bleak post-apocalypse. The way the world glows through the Odradek scan, showing mules, showing packages, showing the exact way that the terrain is going to be shaped out in front of you. The way grass begins to grow and decay when BTs are near. The way chiral particles float and handprints stick to Sam's body as he's pulled in by BTs. The level of detail is so fine-tuned that Sam's clothes even change color when he walks through the blizzard-racked mountains in the Midwest region of the game. So much of this world is incredibly detailed, and on the same degree as the insane style of Persona 5 or Ghost of Tsushima, it's obvious that a clear and focused vision permeates this work to make the whole greater than the sum of its parts. This game is like audio-visual feedback porn. Listening to that satisfying boom the Odradek makes every time you scan. World graphics and textures aside, there's so much information being given to the player at any given time. Every single thing you do has some sort of sound effect or musical cue. The visual design, I mean, just look how fucking pretty this HUD is. Some of the information is explicit, told through exposition or tutorial blurbs, but some things are a lot more subtle. Everything glows or pops or shifts in some way to let you know that something is happening. The cargo will flash when its condition is lowered. BT hands appear in the ground and glow when illuminated by the Odradek. Before long, you really start to understand and internalize the audio-visual language of the game world. You'll spot chiral crystals or cargo across great distances, and you'll breathe out a thick sigh whenever you see the shining facade of an edifice or a shelter emerging over the horizon. And while this doesn't have any particular function, I love little details like the hands which linger on Sam's clothes after he's grabbed by a BT. Even the colors of the fucking piss and poo-poo grenades look so clean and polished. Makes me want to eat that goddamn piss and poop. Fucking put it in a soup and just, lap it all up. The blood or the black tar which stains Sam's clothes after a battle or an encounter with a BT, it's washed off in the shower and you can see the fluid going down the drain. One of the coolest things in both Metal Gear Solid 5 and now Death Stranding is how otherwise innocuous lens flares are used to tell you information about enemy position. In Metal Gear Solid 5, lens flares are used to tell you when light, particularly powerful lights like a spotlight, are shining in your direction. There's even an associated sound effect that comes with it, a sort of high-pitched hissing noise. In Death Stranding, lens flares are used to tell you when the mules are just off screen. It's a small but incredibly effective detail which helps keep you more aware of your surroundings during stealth moments. Time is an important aspect to the story, and its presence, in my experience, is highlighted by the fact that there's no day or night cycle in the game. Rather, the world's colors and weather change with time and location, and they vary between pleasant daylight and extreme entropy. Time seems to pass as a result based on your own movements throughout the game world, which makes the journey itself feel a lot more grueling. When you rest out in the world and you see that the sky hasn't changed since you last saw it, it adds to an otherworldly quality. Time is not universal, it's relative to the people surrounding it. I love the sounds in this game. The music is stunning, of course, and I'll talk about that later, but the sound effects themselves leave my mouth watering. I can taste how good they sound. Try explaining that one, Pavlov. The boom of the Odradek is so fulfilling every time I hit that button. The way the noise deadens when you hold your breath, the clamor and crack when a BT detects you, BB's wails and laughter. Every single little fucking detail has an associated sound, and it's all so beautiful.
How you doing, Sam?
Ludwig Forssell, who also worked on the soundtrack for Metal Gear Solid 5, is an incredible artist. The soundscape he's designed here is leaps and bounds above any Metal Gear game in my opinion. The like sound effect, the way that the game's main theme plays as you complete a delivery or connect a new region, it emphasizes a sense of goodness and completion for helping those around you. And the noises that the mules make, these heavy synthesized shrieks as if they're communicating to each other in some unintelligible language. When they spot you, a roaring sawtooth synth slices across the soundscape to let you know that you're in danger. Nothing here is as iconic as the Metal Gear alert sound or the codec chirp, but they're incredible and immersive in their own right. Now to talk about the broader aesthetic. All of it reminds me quite a bit of 2001: A Space Odyssey. The future tech is all clean and shiny. Sam's and Fragile's jumpsuits even look like spacesuits, which led many, including myself, to believe that the Kojima Productions mascot would be a playable entity in this game. And the way that the game utilizes silence as a technique calls back to the dead silence of space and silent tension of the action throughout 2001: A Space Odyssey. Among other things, it highlights just how small, vulnerable, and lonely the characters are. America itself feels incredibly otherworldly, like you've crash landed on some distant foreign planet, searching for other signs of human life. The occasional glimpses of real-world structures like highways and vehicles feel like relics of a time long since past. The futuristic structures feel cold, empty, and lonely, but the world itself feels like a different realm entirely. One moment you're on some uncanny twin of Earth where the vegetation and landscape feel close but not quite right. Another moment you're in a swamp of volcanic crust and heat, which looks almost like stepping foot on Mars. The next moment, you're at the center of a whiteout on a snow-slathered mountain several dozen degrees below freezing temperature. The timefall and snowstorms make each region feel barely habitable, like the crew searches for a new home in Interstellar. You get a break from it after the halfway mark of the game, where you reach this flat green plain where you can see actual dragonflies. There are no other animals that I've seen in gameplay except the crypto buyouts and the corpse of that deer torn apart by timefall. It's suggested that most animals can't survive the rapid destructive changes to the world's climate. They don't have timefall resistant suits like humans do after all. But the presence of dragonflies implies that smaller animals like insects may actually be surviving, hell, maybe even thriving in this post-apocalypse. This peaceful, verdant plain comes right after a treacherous hike through snowy and rocky mountains. There are mules here, but it's easy as hell to avoid them with all this space. And BTs never spawn here as far as I've seen. They do tend to spawn around the edges, but there's rarely any timefall at the center of this region. It really is the world telling you to rest before the journey ahead. The missions eventually take you back atop the frigid mountains, and all the way to the very peak where a supercell wipes you away. And over the remainder of the game, you trek through increasingly hostile areas until you reach the Nexus, Edge Knot City, which is a desolate ruins beyond recognition and beyond hope. Eerily, the structures here seem to harken back to the collapsed buildings just outside the Bridge's headquarters in Capital Knot City. The key you get here to connect Edge Knot to the network is shaped like the BB pod, but hollow and dead within. I didn't even know this until I played through the extra Fragile missions in the director's cut, but the BB pods are designed to look like a coffin. So you get a pod that is a key that is designed to look like a coffin, and you're using it to connect the chiral network to this cold, desolate, abandoned city. This is a sign that the follies of bridges and the United Cities of America are not in the past. They were devastating, paved with death and destruction, which led to an irreversible fracturing of the world, and in many ways, Bridges hasn't changed one bit. Edge Knot is the distant memory of that devastation, and the skeletons just outside the Bridges headquarters are an ever-present reminder of what has happened and what may come. Edge Knot's destruction is infinite and evolving. An entirely new type of enemy manifests here. Unlike normal BTs, they're visible without the Odra deck. They swarm the skies and streets of the wrecked city and explode when anything touches them. They're literal biological mines and feel more present and terrifying than even the BTs do. They serve as a final hazard, the final throes of a world to keep you away. Interestingly, they can be found at the edges of the map too, right by the crater formed by the destruction of Middle Knot and Central Knot City. It's like a concentration, a nucleus of death. You can see the Central Knot crater too, and you can even get right up close to it, which I didn't know until I played through the DX version and did some of the Half-Life missions. But when you look at it from the other side, from the incinerator in the eastern region, you have a much clearer view overlooking the whole thing. There you can see the dead, either spirits or charred corpses, rising to some undefined place beyond the sky. Death Stranding's soundtrack is a lush mix of weeping strings, resonant and percussive piano phrases, minimalistic synth beats, and tense, dissonant musical effects. The main theme reminds me so much of Radiohead's Daydreaming, which may be why I like it so much. There are a variety of themes and leitmotifs throughout the world. The most incredible of all, I think, is the one that plays when you first reach the incinerator west of Capital Knot to dispose of the body of the late President Strand. That motif is from a theme called the Severed Bond. There are two variations of these themes that play throughout the game, one darker, and one a lot lighter, freer almost. And if you listen closely, you can even hear BB babble as Sam approaches the incinerator. Sam's encounters with BB at the incinerator bookend the entire game. Sam, while going on to expose of a corpse? What the fuck? That sounds dirty as hell. Dispose, you dumbass. Sam's encounters with BB at the incinerator bookend the entire game. Sam, while going to dispose of a corpse, finds with it a small, fragile child still clinging to life. This is a moment where Sam's and BB's lives become intertwined and inseparable. At the end of the game, Sam returns to the incinerator on orders to burn BB, who sleeps unresponsive in his pod. To Bridges, which again hasn't changed all that much, this is a routine disposal of out-of-service hardware. To Sam, he's essentially being told to burn his own child. He chooses instead to disobey and fights to revive the unconscious BB. This is a melding of life and death, which is a theme present throughout the entirety of the game. A bond severed is almost always accompanied by a new bond forged, and both of these moments happen at this incinerator. It makes sense then that BB's theme should punctuate this important setting. Now, to be fair, I don't think this theme plays every time you go to the incinerator, and sometimes not even the first time you go to the incinerator. I'm not sure what exactly triggers the Severed Bond theme to play, but it definitely does play intentionally at this spot sometimes. So I think there's something there. But anyway, I've already talked about mule sounds, but music is at the core of the emotional weight of this entire experience. The way every action has a sonic reaction in gameplay, so too does every emotion have a sonic reflection in the story. The 6-note phrase that permeates the entire game experience, I think, reflects the dueling forces throughout the story. Life versus death, survival versus destruction. The way it wavers and seems to prop up everywhere but fades just as quickly leaves this eerie impression whenever I try to recall it. Particularly, this phrase plays coming to a climax as Amelie explains her role in the world.
I am not a line. I am a single point. Which is why all I could do was just show you the choices and let you decide.
Amelie is the focal point of this duality, so it makes sense that this theme would emphasize her indecision. I'm aware that I'm probably overanalyzing this, but I make music myself, and I've studied a decent amount of musical theory. Many great artists put this level of intentionality and thought into their compositions, and I think there's a lot of value in getting knee-deep into a close reading even of musical elements like this. There's a lot to be learned from, and on a subconscious level, I think everyone can appreciate when a musical theme is utilized well and appropriately. I could go on about the soundtrack, but I'd rather talk now about the licensed music in the game. Aside from the stuff you can listen to in the private rooms, the licensed music is mostly low roar, with a few tracks from Silent Poets thrown in. In the DX version, they added a few more songs, one of which is an absolute fucking banger, and the other ones are really good too. First, I must say this. I feel like Kojima really should have tapped Radiohead to get a song featured in this game, especially now that I've played and experienced the Kid A and Amnesiac exhibit created by Epic Games. It's so trippy, so incredible, and like fucking Kojima, dude, this is right up your alley. But anyway, the low roar and Silent Poets music have an interesting function. In a strange way, these songs highlight the silence. When they play, the camera pans out, the road ahead stretches clearer but vaster, more overbearing, and it becomes that much more clear just how alone Sam is. The music is a part of the weight that Sam is carrying. The music stops when you rest because the peaceful silence of rest is inherently at odds with the dreary weight of the music. Sam can also make his own music while resting by whistling or playing the harmonica. The giggles of BB and the gentle swell of strings as the wind howls creates an entirely different soundtrack to Sam's journey, one that's calmer and filled with warmth and the joy of being in nature. Eeriest of all, though, is when Sam approaches a major location. The music ends abruptly, and the ominous stinger that plays reinforms you of the loneliness, despite all the visual cues telling you that human civilization should be within your grasp. That sudden shift is etched into my mind. It's a subtle cue that what you see is a literal and physical facade, no different from the foreboding mask that Die Hardman wears. Death Stranding is an odd game in ways that are difficult to explain without digging past the surface level observations first. Yes, it's a walking simulator. It has stealth, it has combat, it has shooting, and even a fun fighting minigame at one point. But at its core, the game is about putting one foot in front of the other and making your way forward. How this all plays out, how the open world systems work to keep you at odds with the environment itself, is something that doesn't translate well to video. It's something that can only truly be understood when you have the controller in your hand, or the keyboard and mouse if you're a fucking loser. The reason the game is so odd is because it's a game that lifts so many ideas from other games and weaves them in such an unassuming way that strives to move past genre classification. So many diverse systems, from weather to combat to water to gravity, are intricately woven together in a complex but thoroughly coherent way that makes more and more sense the further you progress through the game. This game demands you play it differently from all others. It's an open world game that discourages exploration. It's a walking simulator where you unlock the ability to fly. It's a stealth game where you ignore enemies entirely. It's a third-person shooter where you're not allowed to kill. It's an escort mission where you carry your target on you at all times. It's a single-player game where other players constantly affect the world around you. It's a survival game where dying doesn't matter. I think that first one is an important one to address primarily. Death Stranding is an open world game that demands you not play it like other open world games. Now, I'm on record not being a huge fan of Skyrim or Fallout 4, but I do very much understand how those games, and even Fallout 76, managed to draw so many into its loop. Exploration. I recommend Joseph Anderson's videos on Fallout 4 and Fallout 76 to thoroughly explain why this sense of exploration is so compelling. He talks about the loop of uncovering some place, finding enemies or a story there that you need to deal with, and looting the area after to yield some cool item that makes the journey worth it.
The cycle goes like this: exploration, combat, gathering. You explore the world and discover a noteworthy area. These places are almost always marked on your compass when you're nearby to act as a guide to find them. More often than not, there's something to fight in these locations or in the surrounding area that leads to them. You loot the location and the bodies of your opponents. You gather resources for yourself. It's also common to find some sort of story in the environment, whether that's a subtle placement of objects and corpses, or something told a little more directly with audio logs, journals, or computer terminals.
Most open world games, especially post-Skyrim open world games, operate on a similar formula. They fill their world with things to be found, often hidden in locations that must be explored thoroughly, or at least in part, in order to find these things. Ubisoft, you know, the sexual abuse company, Ubisoft has codified this sense of exploration so excessively that finding these in Watch Dogs or Assassin's Creed or Far Cry often amounts to scratching a bunch of question marks off of a list. Recently meaning from the time of me writing this script and not from the time of me recording, which is about a year or two later, Ghost of Tsushima took that same Ubisoft formula but expanded on it, turning every found thing or location into a minigame or story which grew your character in a more specific way than a simple XP reward would, and which was compelling to complete in its own right. It was such a surprise and a great feeling every time a yellow bird led me to a bamboo slicing minigame or a new cosmetic item for my sword or outfit. And for many people, that sense of openness and freedom of exploration is the very draw of playing an open world game. The Witcher 3 and even technically not open world games like Dragon Age Origins tie exploration to the expansion of characters and narratives. You might find a new interesting quest line, or while exploring in the middle of a quest, uncover a secret which opens a new line of dialogue or inquiry. But whatever the case, it's another opportunity to flex your unique character build. In these games and other games like Breath of the Wild, exploration is incentivized by the reward. In Fallout, you get XP just for finding a new place. And the loot you get for exploring an area will either look cool or boost your character's stats in a new way. In Breath of the Wild and Ghost of Tsushima, the reward you get for finding a new location is a new cosmetic item or a point which can potentially boost the attributes of your character. In a game like Watch Dogs, you already pretty much know where everything is when you walk around the world in that game. In Watch Dogs 2, for instance, exploration isn't about finding a hidden thing, it's more about using the tools you have to interact with and manipulate the world around you in order to reach an out-of-the-way location. In my experience, this usually led me to a skill point or another unlock I needed to upgrade my hacking skills. And in some games, exploration isn't about progression at all. Grand Theft Auto 4 and Red Dead Redemption 2, cosmetics and other items are all unlocked by buying them out of shops, or just by stealing them off the street. From pretty much the start of the game in GTA 5, I can drive down to the airport, crash through the runway, and steal a plane. I won't have anywhere to store it, but I could sure as hell fly it. Exploration in GTA 5 and Red Dead Redemption 2 is more about stumbling upon random chance events or characters rather than items or points. And I think this is why Easter eggs in these two games are so compelling to many people, because most people will ride up and down all across these worlds and never once see half of the things that are in them. Death Stranding operates fundamentally differently to all of these games, and it isn't terribly upfront about it either. It shows you the big open world and the interesting vistas, and yeah, there are even many things to find, but they're incredibly easy to miss. Half of them don't even spawn until certain conditions are met, and the game doesn't even heavily encourage you to find them, and honestly, none of them are even all that interesting. Most of them are just logs about other works of art that exist outside of the game world. There's one about The Shape of Water, another one about the Low Roar album Zero, and they all celebrate art in one way or another, but they don't expand the world or grow your character. It took me a while to realize this, and I imagine it was a big turnoff for many of the people who gave Death Stranding an honest try, but couldn't get into it. This world wasn't made to be explored. Yes, especially on the second map, if you see a mountain in the distance, you can go there, and you can climb it.
That mountain is not just a backdrop. You can walk all the way to the top of that mountain.
But unless you're delivering a package, there really is no reason to. Metal Gear Solid 5 played with this idea similarly. The open world in that game isn't meant to be explored either. It's meant to be used as a backdrop for the stealth gameplay, providing choices and tools for the player to accomplish the mission, and that really is its only purpose. But even Death Stranding is operating somewhat differently. The world of Death Stranding is not a sandbox, it's an obstacle course. And consequently, Death Stranding is a game that is not about the destination. Death Stranding is about the journey. Journey is a convenient way to describe the feeling that Death Stranding evokes. Journey, developed by that game company, you know, that one, in Santa Monica Studio, follows the journeyer along a quest up a mountain. It's a walking simulator too, but unlike Death Stranding, there's no combat and only one or two stealth sections spread across this relatively short experience. But what this game does so incredibly well is, through the immaculate melding of atmosphere, soundtrack, and aesthetic, force the player through the harrowing burden that is the journeyer's quest. The highs and lows, joy, exhilaration, fear, desperation are reflected in the world and the journeyer's response to it, all the while the journeyer simply continues to push forward. Death Stranding is split into three distinct modes: stealth gameplay, combat gameplay, and traversal gameplay. The traversal gameplay, that journey, stands at the core of Death Stranding, but the world in Death Stranding is larger and wider than that of Journey, and in some areas, it's falling apart at the seams. And Death Stranding introduces a new dimension to that traversal experience: gravity. Unlike in Journey, Sam cannot float or fly. He can't fall infinitely and land unscathed. Until the DX version, that is. When he slides down a hill, he has the potential to lose his footing and topple over. I watched a lot of promotional material leading to Death Stranding's release, and upon playing the game, the first thing that struck me was how free and light Sam feels when he's only carrying his own weight. He's agile, he's quick, he's capable of turning on a dime, and this also means he jumps higher and is far less likely to fall or lose his balance. It's not something that can be properly conveyed through video. You have to feel the controller in your hand to understand exactly how much pressure is placed on you and how much control is taken away. Sam and the vehicles in this game are designed to use balance against you, especially when moving at high speeds. Even swinging the camera wildly when carrying cargo can cause Sam to lean or lose control. It's this constant three-way tug of war between the player, Sam, and the packages he's carrying. And more forces engage in that tug of war as you start factoring wind direction, vehicles, and other things. Oh, I thought I wasn't recording. I was gonna be so pissed off. I was gonna be so mad. I was gonna be livid. Your reward for engaging in this tug of war and successfully delivering a package is likes. Likes are a social currency that you can get from other players. It's obviously tied heavily to the theme of social networks and sociality and making connections with others through generous acts and care for the world, but beyond that, they're also a form of experience point. Gain enough likes and Sam levels up, which can increase his balance, his maximum carry weight, and decrease the effect of exhaustion on his body. Beyond that, each individual NPC you deliver to has its own like level. Get their likes past a certain threshold and you unlock certain cosmetics or various tools that can help you on your next journey. Most unlocks serve a purpose, even if it is only a minor one. These little backpack trinkets have different effects like keeping away timefall or making cryptobiotes less likely to run away. It really is a testament to the strength of the different systems that all these unlocks can have tangible but distinct effects from one another. But I'm not even joking when I say that Death Stranding has one of the best and most satisfying progression paths I have ever experienced in a game. From post boxes to towers to bridges to roads to zip lines, handguns to assault rifles to quad rocket launchers, power skeletons to speed skeletons to all-terrain skeletons, almost every unlock, even in the late game, is fine-tuned to serve you as the world and scenarios steadily ramp up difficulty. But these upgrades serve unique purposes with different strengths and drawbacks, so even in the late game, you find yourself using tools like ladders and climbing anchors from the beginning of the game. There are some upgrades you get for certain items. The most useful upgrades I chase are the upgrades for the all-terrain skeleton and the speed skeletons, so they become more compact and can fit on each of Sam's shoulders. This makes travel between snowy and flat terrains much simpler as I can switch between skeletons on the fly. And as I ventured on into the DX version, there's many more things I didn't even consider, like level 4 armor plates and the jump ramp and the level 3 stabilizer, which are incredible unlocks. What this game expands on from Metal Gear Solid 5 is the sense that each piece of equipment is a choice with its own benefits and setbacks. The reason for this is that there's a risk to each piece of equipment, especially when you want to move as fast as possible. But preparing for the journey a certain way can mitigate many of those risks depending on where you're going and what kinds of packages you're delivering. There's no right way to play, and it's on the player to find the combination of equipment that's the least costly but also provides the most satisfying gameplay experience. Motorcycles are fast but unwieldy. Trucks are much slower, but that makes them much more susceptible to strikes from the mule's electric poles. At a glance, someone might see this truck tilting and say, wow, the handling in this game looks fucking awful. In short, yes, that's the point. Specifically, some packages, like the aforementioned pizza, need to be delivered delicately. This means that it can't be turned on their side or upside down. When the truck tilts like this at high speeds, it is enforcing the handle with care gameplay loop. You'll get to your destination faster, sure, but tilt too often, run out of battery, or come up against a tall hill, and that truck might turn into nothing more than a really heavy, oversized truck. I wrote that. That was a joke, I guess. Oversized, oh, brick, as well. I wrote brick. I didn't write truck, I wrote brick. Okay, let's start that over. Let's do that one again. Take two. Where's the director again? Oh, I'm the director. Okay. You'll get to your destination faster, sure, but tilt too often, run out of battery, or come up against a tall hill, and that truck might turn into nothing more than a really heavy, oversized brick. Bring too many packages with nothing to carry them in, and suddenly you have a choice to make. Press on, turn back, or find another way forward. Now, I lost all the footage for this because fuck El Gato sometimes, but when I was playing through the DX version, I actually was trying to make a delivery to Mountain Knot City so I can max it out as soon as possible. It was one of those gigantic deliveries where I needed a truck in order to fit everything in one go. Fucking hell, I decided instead of going through BT territory, I was going to go through terrorist territory, and it fucking sucked. They immediately came upon me. I tried to take them out early, and I didn't have any weapons on me, so they just completely knocked me out and stole all my shit. I didn't have an autosave. Going back would have meant having to play through another hour of mundane shit I didn't want to do. So I spent literal hours trying to figure out how to get my packages back from them without any fucking weapons. Now, I fucking wish I had the footage of this because it was really fucking fun. I ended up having to knock them all out with my power gloves and my hands and fists and packages that I could find, just so I could get my packages back and continue with the mission. I didn't have any guns. I managed to find one sticky gun, and it was very useful. And I took out the entire terrorist camp that was trying to kill me the entire time. It was really fucking cool. You should have been there.
Been busy? Seems all the mules in your vicinity have been incapacitated.
Anyway, the point is, if I had prepared differently, I could have gotten through that scenario differently. I could have had more weapons. I could have had a different vehicle that could have made it through the terrain better. I could have gone through the BT area. The open world's like a playground in that sense. Do I go down the slide, climb down the ladder, or go right back down the stairs the safe way? That choice is at the core of interaction with this open world, and the tools you have on hand bias your choice in one direction or another. I completely avoided the sticky gun my first playthrough. I thought it was a cool gimmick, but fairly useless. But during my second playthrough, it turned out to be one of my favorite gadgets. Collecting packages from hillsides, across rivers, and accidentally dropping Mama into a ditch.
What the hell, Sam?
Yeah, but it's such a fun and satisfying gadget which worked well with the way that I played. My favorite method of travel is 2 floating carriers with a speed skeleton, and conveniently it's another great example of the forces that apply against Sam and that burden the player. The floating carriers are incredible for carrying vast volumes of packages while keeping the effect on Sam himself fairly minimal. They float over land and rough terrain and will even follow you over flat or mostly flat ladders. But they don't do well against cliffs, they can't follow you over zip lines, they require a steady stream of chiralium crystals to power them, and they take up a lot of space when not in use, and they will tumble over if they impact anything at a high speed. But despite all those drawbacks, their benefits far outweigh the negatives for me, and once you get used to how they move and what they can or can't do, it's a great way to travel with large hauls. Even when Sam isn't carrying anything, if your floating carriers are weighed down, they will pull on Sam as he walks. This creates a weird effect which I'm not sure will come across on video, but it's effectively like trying to go one way while the huge pit bull on your leash wants to go another. The weight of the carriers directly influences the pressure placed on Sam's body, and he's unable to turn as quickly or run as fast. Sometimes he might even lose his balance. Aside from the zip lines and the skeletons, every new transport method has this effect on Sam, and combating and utilizing this inertia becomes a large part of the experience of the journey. One of my favorite things to do, for instance, is to let myself fall off balance when crossing a river. If I do this, the packages in my floating carrier will stay afloat, and anything compactly packed on my limbs or on my backpack will stay secure. So if I have the otter hood, I can then steer myself downstream to get from one part of the river to another much quicker than I would by walking. You can similarly utilize gravity to slide faster down hills. Unlike in Metal Gear Solid 5 though, this gameplay loop rewards improvisation almost as equally as pre-preparation. There's a great deal of randomness to weather patterns and BT encounters, but the most randomness comes from finding objects and structures left by other players. If your boots are wearing down, you might have to go out of your way to check a shared locker to see if any boots are there. You may have trouble crossing a canyon going one way, but coming back you find someone has completed a bridge or a road, which makes the trek far less taxing. With these aspects and the fact that you can find random packages to be delivered scattered throughout the world, the game encourages you to improvise and to change your routes and plans accordingly. It becomes incredibly easy to get sidetracked and overwhelmed with packages in this game. It forces you to reconsider your equipment, check often that everything's still strong enough for the journey, and look around for good shortcuts which might make your journey a little easier. It's an interesting form of emergent gameplay that drives much of the experience. There are a lot of gauges and conditions to keep track of when playing the game. Stamina, blood, exhaustion, balance, weight, cargo condition, cargo container condition, footwear condition, heat, wind, battery, BB status, and that's all before you even come into contact with any enemies. Each of these ticks down very, very slowly, but unlike some cheaper survival games, it never simply feels like you're babysitting your stats. It's also fine-tuned that you may never experience the negative effects of some of these during a single playthrough, especially if you're making frequent use of private rooms. For instance, when BB's status gauge goes out, she goes into a state of autotoxemia, which means she's no longer able to detect BTs. BB's status gauge runs down when in proximity of BTs or when she is stressed due to falling or other factors. But in 2 full playthroughs of the game, I've only ever experienced BB getting autotoxemia once, outside of the beginning of the game where it happens as a tutorial. I realized in the middle of this section that BB's stress was getting very high, and once the autotoxemia set in, it left me with a new chance for improvisation. Do I press on and hope I don't run into any BTs, or do I go back quite some distance and rest in a private room? The game also wants these effects to serve the experience without being a severe hindrance or nuisance to the player. Taking cues from Metal Gear Solid 4, Death Stranding features a combat high mechanic, which maxes out your stamina and keeps it maxed out for the duration of any combat encounter. Also, I haven't tested this, but it seems like Sam's balance is a lot more stable during combat highs, even when carrying heavy packages. I also realized during my very hard playthrough that when BB suffers autotoxemia, it doesn't occur right away. Like combat encounters, BB will remain healthy during enemy encounters. Once the enemy encounter is over, if BB's status has fully depleted, he will then experience autotoxemia. That's the game's subtle way of pushing the momentum of a tense stealth or combat sequence by keeping you focused on fewer things at a time. During combat, the main things to worry about are blood, shoe quality, and weapon loadout. BTs are vulnerable to Sam's blood, so Mama begins developing weapons which utilize Sam's blood to hurt BTs. The first one you get is a hematic grenade. As you progress, you get access to stronger grenades, guns, assault rifles, and even quad rocket launchers, which all require massive amounts of blood to use. These weapons also have ammo counts, but because there are no ammo packs or caches to be found in the world, you're encouraged to throw away or replace equipment for which you have no use. Sam replenishes all his gauges by returning to any safe room, and later in the game, these safe rooms are able to be built by players, which makes them fairly abundant if playing online. But while out in the open world, or in the middle of combat, Sam needs to use various other means to restore his survival gauges. Stamina can be restored by drinking Monster Energy, and you can refill your canteen by standing in water, which is a detail which makes me believe Monster Energy, at least out in the open world, was supposed to be water at first, before the energy drink company got involved. BB can be soothed, preventing autotoxemia through various means.
There are a few things you can do if your BB starts showing signs of distress.
Such as?
such as take a moment to look after it. Cradle the pot, gently rock it, that sort of thing.
And Sam's blood level, which is effectively his health, can be replenished by eating cryptobiotes or, more effectively, by equipping blood bags. Firstly, these blood bags are all filled with Sam's blood. People use his blood specifically to battle back BTs. This is possible because Sam's blood, as he is a repatriate and has dooms, is uniquely harmful to BTs.
For the first time in history, a human being has defeated a BT. Were you not a repatriate, I doubt it would have been possible. Not only does contact with your fluids pose no risk of triggering a void out, but in much the same way as your car is rejected by the beach, your blood can be used to expel BTs from our world and return them to the other side. You've given us hope, Sam. Perhaps we may yet be saved.
But I believe other people in this world also use Sam's blood for medical purposes as well. That would mean Sam is a universal donor, which neatly falls along with the general themes of carrying the world on your shoulder. Secondly, blood bags can be mounted to Sam, which automatically restores blood level after several seconds. Blood will also be drawn from the equipped blood bag first, before Sam's natural blood level when firing certain weapons that use his blood. As Sam's blood and stamina decrease, his balance worsens and he runs the risk of falling unconscious. This becomes a major thing to manage, especially during the cliff boss fights and especially during the BT boss fights later on. Weapon equipment and degradation in games is largely considered a nuisance. In Bloodborne, The Witcher 3, Breath of the Wild, for instance, weapon degradation does little to add to the minute-to-minute gameplay or to the experience of traveling the world. On the contrary, degradation often means a mandatory and sometimes lengthy backtrack to a blacksmith or an armorer to get equipment repaired. In Breath of the Wild, I found it particularly annoying because weapons break so incredibly fast and there's no way to repair them once they're broken. So you might find a really cool sword and be disincentivized from using it or from engaging in combat entirely because you don't want your cool item to break. In Death Stranding and other similar survival games, however, there's a fine balance between degradation being a hassle and adding to the weight of the survival experience. I think that the appropriate balance is one that does not harshly punish players for letting their meters run out, and one that provides other opportunities for players to express themselves through gameplay, even if one item is not available. If BB suffers autotoxemia, for instance, you can still continue playing the game. You can even go into BT areas. It's a lot more difficult and you have to do it differently than you otherwise would before, but it's still very much possible, and in some cases it's even more fun. In this case, I think Death Stranding succeeds where Breath of the Wild doesn't. With Breath of the Wild, I found myself incredibly frustrated time and again when I was incapable of participating in combat due to a lack of weaponry or a lack of arrows. Because of Death Stranding's emphasis on asymmetric gameplay, being under-equipped for combat is not a major concern. Take a mule encounter, for example. In any given mule encounter, your target is not the mule, it's the objects they're hoarding. Death Stranding pushes you to react on the fly and to steal from your enemy before they steal from you. Their equipment scales such that when you unlock a particular item, the mules will often begin carrying a certain version of that item. It creates the aesthetic effect of this continual arms race between Sam and the mules. This also means that you can potentially steal items such as grenades or traversal equipment from them whenever you need it. Of course, what you get from them is random, but it's possible and incredibly rewarding to get in, steal what you need, and get out. If your shoes wear down, which happens incredibly slowly to the point where you should always be pretty well stocked on fresh shoes when you need them, you can find sandalweed around the world, which keeps your feet secure for a short time. And even on the off chance that you run out of sandalweed, Sam can walk around for some time without shoes before he starts to become affected. I haven't tested this myself, mainly because it's hard to imagine a scenario in which all my shoes degrade and I have no sandalweed, but I imagine the amount of time you have to move without shoes is more than enough to make it to a private room. most punishing degradation in the game is probably that of the battery. Sam has a personal battery which powers anything, like the speed skeleton or the heater which mount to Sam's body. And vehicles that Sam rides also have their own battery. Importantly, items like the floating carrier don't take battery but are powered by chiral crystals instead. But when a vehicle battery dies and you're carrying a large load, it can leave you, dare I say, stranded. Items can be replaced, and because Sam repatriates when he dies, even running out of blood is a mere inconvenience. Running out of battery, however, is truly punishing because it eliminates your most enhanced means of traversal, aside from floating carriers and your 2 legs. This is where 2 important aspects of Death Stranding come into play: connections and self-care. Metal Gear Solid 4 had warnings compelling players not to smoke and to dispose of trash like cigarette butts properly. It also flashed a warning telling players to take a break after playing for more than 3 hours. Kojima seems to have a thing for wanting players to take good care of themselves, more so than I've seen with any other game. In Death Stranding, when you rest, the game autosaves, which encourages you to put the controller down and step away. While private rooms restore Sam's gauges instantly, you're not always close to one, so you'll occasionally have to rest in either hot springs or on the ground to restore Sam's stamina over time. A fun fact is that hot springs don't only affect Sam. There are 2 missions in the game which involve carrying a live person on Sam's back and keeping them safe along the way. The first, carrying the chiral artist, is fairly simple. The second, carrying Mama halfway across the map, is a lot more challenging and involved a boss fight as well. I'll talk about that boss fight later, as it's the perfect showcase for how the open world functions in Death Stranding, but if Mama or the chiral artist take any damage throughout your journeys with them, which is exceedingly likely in Mama's case, their full health can be restored by visiting a hot spring. More than that, there are some special interactions you can do with them while visiting the hot spring. It's some really cool stuff, and it reinforces the theme that by helping yourself, you're helping others.
Ba-ban, ba-ban, ban, ban. Abi-banana. Ban-ban, ban-ban, ban-ban. Abi-ba-bi-ba-bi-ba. Ban-ban, ban-ban, ban-ban. Abi-banana. Ba-ban, ban-ban, ban-ban. Abi-banana. Iyu-dana. Ahahan. Iyu-dana. Ahahan.
More to the point though, Sam's battery is solar powered, which means that as long as it's not raining, Sam's battery power will recover over time. That means that if you don't mind waiting, you're never completely out of battery in the middle of a journey. Of course, the replenish rate is slow, but as I mentioned before, the game expects you to use moments like these as breaks, not just for Sam, but for the player as well. By taking care of yourself first, and maybe putting the game down for a little while, you are better able to aid Sam on his journey when you return. Secondly, there's the ever-present theme of connections. Battery can be restored by building generators around the map, but I tend not to carry PCCs or chiral printers with me as I travel. The online aspects of the game give me the opportunity to either find a PCC left by another player in a locker or around the world, or to find a generator that another player built somewhere. What's great about Death Stranding is that a structure built by another player becomes a permanent fixture in your game world until it is worn down by timefall. So logging out and logging back in doesn't delete anything, it's always there. This means that if I recognize that I'm in a certain part of the game world, I might risk driving a little farther in my truck because I know that Hentai Master 3477 placed a generator right around the corner. Occasionally, you might also find NPCs roaming around the world with PCCs or other resources that they'll trade with you. The social aspects are really an interesting experiment. Beneficial actions potentially help everyone, while negative actions only affect your own game world. Even getting a void out, I'm pretty sure, only affects your game world, not anyone else's. But even dying and repatriating in a particular place might help another player in their world by establishing a link that makes it more likely for the two players to encounter one another. But nothing shows this beneficial attribute more than the boss fights. On very hard mode, bosses have a ton of health, and this single aspect effectively forces me to request help for more weapons and blood bags in the middle of a fight. You will almost never have enough equipment to be able to beat a boss on very hard mode in this game unless you ask for help, and I don't even know what it's like playing offline. And remember, dying doesn't matter, so you don't typically have to worry about keeping yourself safe, only about dealing enough damage to enemies. So when you're battling one of the larger BT enemies, which still takes place in an open world setting, you're encouraged to utilize the communicate button to ask for more weapons and equipment, and blood bags from other players. Players are constantly and intricately connected. Once another player's world interacts with yours, your journeys and your battles are intertwined, and sometimes you might even start recognizing familiar names as you journey throughout the world. You can also find many items and equipment just lying around the world. Some are programmed to spawn randomly around the world. Usually these are packages that need to be delivered, but others can be dropped from players or left behind. There's this constant sense that the world is moving without you. That's typically a good feeling to have when you're watching the protagonist of any universe. But I don't mean this as a narrative device. I mean, it feels like you're on a spinning cog, just one, and as you move, the cog spins a tiny bit. And as other players move, their cogs spin, which grind against yours, causing yours to spin as well. And when yours spins, theirs spin faster and faster in this intricate, unending cycle. There are several main interactions within Death Stranding. Most obviously, the core of the gameplay loop revolves around traversal, literally pushing L to walk and pushing R to manipulate the camera. But there are also several other key interactions. The communication button, which allows you to call out, sing, and give likes to other players.
Over here!
Hey!
Hey!
What's with all the noise?
Anybody hear me?
My ears are ringing, son.
This is Sam reaching into the void, finding connections with people through shared experiences rather than physical contact.
Hey! Over here!
That leads to the second mode of interaction, the grab buttons. I might also call them the touch or reach buttons. They, along with the action button, allow Sam to physically interact with the environment around him. These buttons specifically are L2 and R2 on a PlayStation controller, or LMB and RMB on a keyboard and mouse. It feels to me much more satisfying to use these buttons on a controller for the reasons I've touched on before. The stress you're putting on your hands and on the controller to me felt like actually reaching out to grab something. You can also use these buttons to square up and regain balance. Sam does this by bracing himself and clutching the packages closer, or by grabbing his harness for support. Apparently, holding the packages in this way also prevents them from taking any damage, as Sam can physically cradle the packages in his arms and use his body to shield them from outside impact. There's something incredibly intimate about interacting with the world this way, and this leads to cool mechanics where, to throw objects, you actually have to swing your arm using the action button, then let go of the grab mid-swing, corresponding to whichever arm Sam is swinging to let go of the object. It feels weirdly natural, especially when using a controller, and the touch I like is that Sam is right-handed, so objects thrown from that arm fly farther than objects thrown from his other. As I mentioned before, the grab buttons are used to regain balance, but they can also alter how Sam interacts with the terrain. Clutching the harness stops Sam from sliding uncontrollably. I think it also causes him to roll when jumping from certain heights, and helps him to lose less stamina and balance when climbing or crossing rivers. But get this, when you have the power gloves, you can then start letting Sam use his hands when climbing because it prevents stamina loss, which is one of my favorite fucking things. I saw some criticism around the time of the Phantom Pain's release that revolved around its boss fights. Generally speaking, people feel the boss fights in Metal Gear Solid 5 are not as good as those in previous Metal Gear games, and I'm inclined to agree. But I think there's a level of intricacy there that shouldn't be ignored. Metal Gear Solid 5's boss fights feel less carefully constructed because they exist in an open world. Unlike a linear game where you're trapped in until you beat the big mech thing with a sniper rifle, the open world is predicated on the notion that you have a wider variety of choices for engaging with the boss battle. One of those choices is not to engage in the boss battle at all. The skulls in Metal Gear Solid 5 are a terrifying force, and while it's a little buggy, if you play Metal Gear Solid 5 with the mod that lets the skulls spawn randomly in the open world, it spices up the gameplay a shit ton. It's such a good fit that it makes me wonder if that was an intended game feature that got cut before release. During one of the missions where you encounter the skulls in Metal Gear Solid 5, they only spawn when you reach your objective, which is this truck carrying yellow cake uranium. As you approach the truck, 4 skulls emerge and begin stalking around the area in their inhuman, zombie-like way. And suddenly, whether you know it or not, you're presented with several choices. Choice 1. Take out your largest, most phallic sniper rifle and blow your load all over them sumbitches. Choice 2. Go in stealthily, steal the truck, and get out.
You have arrived at your destination.
Leave the mission area by chopper or by land.
Running away is presented as a viable strategy in Kojima's open worlds, and Death Stranding is no exception. I mean, consider how stealth works in these games in general. Once you've done what you need to do, there's no reason to linger. Get the job done and get the hell out of there, or you can stay and fight if you prefer, and there are certain rewards for doing so. It was this battle in Death Stranding that helped me realize the full breadth of choices I had during some of these boss fights.
Do to make it out alive is not get eaten. Sound like fun? Of course it does.
Sam is tasked with carrying Mama from her lab near South Knot City across the map to Mountain Knot City. But the moment you step out of the lab, Higgs is waiting with a little gift. On hard mode, the fight was simple. 1v1 no-holds-barred battle against this eldritch lion octopus looking thing. But on very hard mode, suddenly there were 3 of these motherfuckers, each with its own gargantuan health bar, and I threw myself against them time and again with no luck taking even a single one of them down. Remember, death doesn't matter. There are only two ways to get a game over here. If an enemy hits you with a special attack, it may make Sam stumble and fall over, after which the enemy is very likely to follow up with an attack which eats Sam. They chomp down, antimatter mixes with living matter, city go boom boom. Alternatively, if Mama dies here, it's also a game over.
God damn it! We've lost Mama.
But if Sam dies and repatriates without being eaten, and Mama doesn't get killed herself, everything's peachy. It took me many tries to realize that you don't even have to fight these things. One of your choices truly is just to run away. When lesser BTs catch you, running away is always a possibility, but this was a real, legit boss fight with a cutscene and everything. I was thoroughly amazed when I realized I could just dodge these guys and haul ass across the battlefield to escape before they could catch me. But running away is not even the only choice you have here. I realized I could run, but those lions drop a lot of chiral crystals when you defeat them. Plus, getting rid of them clears out the time fall and BTs for a short period of time, so I didn't want the opportunity to go to waste. I realized, after many more game overs, that I needed to think even further outside the box. I noticed that the BTs were chasing after me, not Mama. And I also noticed that the entryway to Mama's lab, which is perfectly housed off from the timefall, was just open enough for someone to, say, wait inside. So once the battle began, I brought Mama into the lab and sat her down inside. Suddenly, I can fight these things without having to worry about keeping her safe. I can move freer, turn quicker, jump farther, and when the battle is over, I can just pick her back up again. This level of choice and freedom completely blew my mind, and it was a strategy I'd never even considered until my very hard playthrough. Weirdly, I started off the game utilizing an iteration of this strategy. When traveling to the way station west of Capital Knot City, I knew I would encounter a field of BTs. This was my second playthrough after all. BTs spawn in denser groups in very hard mode, and so I knew there was no way I could ride my motorcycle through without getting caught and getting my packages damaged in the process. So I dropped my packages into a nearby private locker, I parked my trike a safe distance away, and I intentionally got caught by the BTs. I defeated the BT, collected its chiral crystals, then I picked up my packages, got on my trike, and cycled on through the newly cleared and safe area. Some people might hear this and think that sounds boring. Why bother having boss fights if you can just avoid them? Well, firstly, there are many boss fights you can't avoid. In fact, most of them. But more importantly, I think it's critical to consider the different tools a game gives for a player to interact with the world around them. I recently spoke, not recently, god damn, this was like 2 years ago, what the fuck? Anyway, I spoke previously in my Pokemon Crown Tundra video that it seemed like Game Freak didn't put extra thought into what that open world was doing and how the player would interact with it in interesting ways. Death Stranding leaps and bounds ahead of Pokemon, considers that interaction. The open world provides the players the choice to engage with enemies the way they see fit. Just like how in Metal Gear Solid 5 you could set off a bomb in one area to lure enemies away from another. Death Stranding is all about considering your situation and the tools you have available to navigate the various hazards the world throws at you. You can go in guns blazing, or you can play it smarter. Place your vulnerable packages down to keep them safe while you dispatch with the enemies. Or if you feel unequipped and unwilling to battle, you can just sprint past to your destination or run back to a place where you can get more prepared. The open world itself is a tool for the player to make use of. It's one of the many reasons why this game had to be a sandbox as opposed to a linear game. There's one other type of boss fight in Death Stranding, and those are the stealth boss fights against human-sized enemies. You get 3 of these against Cliff and 1 against Higgs. Unlike the BT boss fights, these fights take place in special arenas separate from the normal world map. That means there's no running away until the enemy is defeated. These also take place on beaches, which means no repatriation. If you die, you die.
There's no repatriation here. One of us dies. That's it. He goes to the other side. It's nice. Huh? Lucky loser gets to put an end to this rinse and repeat bullshit once and for all. So, no BTs, no void outs, no bullshit. Just a good old-fashioned boss fight. Stick versus rope. Gun versus Strand.
The Cliff boss fights carry the DNA of some of the boss fights from Metal Gear Solid 4. Metal Gear Solid 4 has some of the best stealth-based boss fights in the genre, and a large part of that is the sense of weakness and vulnerability you feel when sneaking around these winding maze-like maps. Cliff employs an army of undead soldiers to hunt you down, but he's the real boss. I love how Kojima handles minion design, by the way. A lot of games, I'm thinking Metal Gear Revengeance, Dragon Age Inquisition, The Last of Us 1 and 2, and a bunch of others, they use minions to pad out the battle time or add to the surface level difficulty rather than actually incorporating minions into the mechanics of the battle. The Crying Wolf boss fight from Metal Gear Solid 4 is the best example in my experience of how minion design can be intricately woven into the mechanics of a boss fight. The Cliff battles do this pretty well too. You're constantly under threat of being swarmed by Cliff's soldiers while you sneak around the map to find Cliff before he finds you. The first Cliff battle takes you to the trenches of World War I. The second takes you to a French city torn apart in the ravages of World War II. And the third battle takes you through the thick blood-red jungles of Vietnam. Each one has pretty strong Metal Gear Solid 4 vibes, and each one plays a little bit differently from the last. Dealing with human-sized opponents means the terrain is less of an obstacle for you and more for your enemies. Use it to hide and for cover from enemy fire, and in this way it feels more like a battle against Laughing Octopus or Raging Raven, while the BT battles feel like a unique Death Stranding experience. But anyway, that's enough about battles. I think it's now time we discussed the story. So, this was part 1 of the Death Stranding video essay that I've been working on for about 2-3 years at this point. I've been teasing it for a while, not intentionally. I just kind of start working on stuff and want everyone to know that I'm working on it, and then when I don't release it for years, it seems like I'm teasing it, but I'm just like, no, I just didn't finish it yet. So it's still not done. This is only part 1 of 2. There's going to be 2 parts in total. Not planning on splitting it again. I basically got to a point where I was working on it for all these years, and I had the first chunk ready pretty much, and I just kept pushing it back, and I felt like I reached a natural stopping point right before talking about the actual story of the game. I felt like I reached a natural stopping point to just kind of stop editing here and then put this part out, because I have been working on it for a while. I'm really proud of it. I think it looks good, and I think it says a lot as far as the themes and the other things going. So if I timed this right, I feel like Kojima, I'm recording this on September, what day is it? September 5th, September 6th, 2023. If I time this right, I think Kojima is going to be releasing a TGS Death Stranding trailer. If not, he's definitely going to do it at the Game Awards, I feel like. So if I time this right, this video should be coming out right after a new trailer reveal. So hopefully it's topical. I really have been wanting to talk about Death Stranding for a while. I very, very much like it. And I know there's a lot of things that are not everyone's cup of tea, but I hope this video can be sort of a good explanation of the game's themes and its strengths and weaknesses for people who may not even ever play it or may not ever want to play it. So yeah, part 2 will be coming. I'm not going to set a date for it because I haven't even really started editing part 2. I just kind of finished part 1, polishing it up, and I'm going to put that out. And then part 2, I'm going to get started on eventually. And eventually down the line, once that's done, I'm going to splice the 2 together. And in the script, they fit together pretty well. So it's not going to be like a weird random splice. I'm going to put them together in one big chunky video and release them together. And yeah, just I guess thank you, and I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I hope you're excited for part 2 whenever I release that. The trailer for Death Stranding 2 got me hyped when I first saw it at the Game Awards. I haven't watched it since, and I cut out a whole section of this part right here where I was going to just kind of speculate on what I think the game was going to be. I don't know. I really don't know. I do have a suspicion that the gameplay is going to be significantly different from Death Stranding 1. It's not going to be just the walking simulator kind of thing. It's going to be significantly evolved from that. Although I don't know. I have no actual clue. So we'll just have to wait and see. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the video. Take care out there. Goodbye.
I don't think Radiohead is a red flag artist because, again, they're one of these groups that is so popular and so widely listened to by everybody. It's hard to get a specific sense of the fan base. But if they are one of these super obsessive fans that thinks they're the greatest band of all time, yeah, you should approach that situation with caution.